Today, the issue Democrats still don't know how to talk about.
They know that there's a crisis right now within the Democratic Party base about Israel. They can see the public opinion polling. Unfavorable views of Israel have skyrocketed.
As the Democratic Party looks to 2028, its base has shifted dramatically on Gaza. But can the party catch up to its voters? And what happens if it doesn't? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, before we go on with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you want us to do next. And if you're listening to this on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from, and feel free to leave us a 5-star rating while you're there. It helps other people discover the show you already know and love.
I am Omar Baddar, and I am a U.S. Middle East policy analyst, focused primarily on Israel and Palestine, but other issues as well.
Omar, welcome back to The Take. Now, of course, you and I go way back, and we've had discussions like the one we're going to have today, in person, all the time. But let's share it with a wider audience now. Let's start with a name that we haven't heard in a while, and that is Kamala Harris. She's weighing another presidential run in 2028. And as she's doing that, she's asking the Democratic National Committee to release its autopsy of what happened during her last campaign. What have you heard about what the report says?
So we don't know fully what's in the report, but we do know that based on what is leaked in Axios, that the policies of the Biden-Harris administration on Gaza and Kamala Harris's refusal to deviate from that policy of applying pressure on Israel and some measure of accountability in the midst of a horrific genocide that Israel was launching with the full support of the United States had caused Kamala Harris essentially significant support electorally in that election.
Axios has learned some of the details of the report. Their article reads, in part, activists from the Institute for Middle East Understanding Policy Project told the DNC that the Biden-Harris administration's support for Israel was a factor in the party's losses because it drained support from some young people and also progressives. Axios independently verified that Democratic officials conducting the autopsy believed the issues harmed the party's standing with some voters.
And so it is fair to assume that this has been, frankly, extremely significant in terms of the outcome of the election. It's unsurprising for those of us who are paying attention about the way things have changed in a way that the Democratic establishment refused to see. Younger people consume media differently. They were watching the horror unfolding in Gaza on their phones. They were seeing firsthand the sheer brutality and mass murder that was unfolding and destruction. And it simply was out of sync with the Democratic Party establishment that just still was stuck to an old mindset of saying that you just support Israel right or wrong. You don't ask any questions. You feign concern for Palestinian civilians. You say, isn't it horrible? Without actually acknowledging or addressing the fact that the U.S. is directly responsible for the fact that Israel can do this to them. That is basically the story of that. And it's quite clear also that Kamala Harris herself has, been extremely remorseful about that position, very wide-eyed about the fact that this has cost her the election. It's evident in the book that she wrote. It's evident in multiple interviews in which she's openly saying, we've made a mistake.
I actually write about the issue of what has been happening in Gaza in my book. And I will tell you, a lot of what this process has been for me has been about reflection. Look, we should have done more as an administration. We should have done more.
So I think she's eager to put that out in a way to kind of vindicate, because there's a lot of arguing in public discourse within the Democratic Party about the extent to which it was that policy and the pressure that Kamala Harris was under to not create so-called daylight between her and Biden and what the impact of that was.
Yeah. Omar, this autopsy was promised by the Democratic Party. But when the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Ken Martin, was asked about it on Pod Save America, which is this popular political podcast hosted by former Barack Obama aides, he hedged
Why not release the full report? What's in the report that you wouldn't want
Well, first off,
to publicize?
there's no smoking gun in the report. And I know that's what everyone's so eager to learn. The smoking gun. Guess what, John?
But if there's no smoking gun, why wouldn't you just release it then?
What do you make of that?
I mean, it's quite transparent how evasive he is while pretending that he's not being evasive. That much, I think. And we keep going back to that same point where I think they just think they're cleverer than they actually are. They are clearly BSing the public, but are under this bizarre impression that it's going over well. And this is so reminiscent of the election itself, where people are telling you, we see through this. This is nonsense. And there's only one way to address this, is being honest and straightforward and just put the damn report out. And anything short of that is clearly an indication of the fact that they are hiding something. And I worry that what they're banking on in this case is that Trump's self-destruction, the implosion of MAGA, is going to be sufficient for Democrats to do well without them meaningfully changing course. And maybe there's some truth to that in the short term, but that is not a winning long-term strategy. You need meaningful, serious change within the Democratic Party to re-earn the trust of the people. And that is just simply not the direction that the establishment is moving in.
Well, I think the pushback that the DNC would give, that they wouldn't release it because they didn't want it to distract from the work of winning elections.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense that the work of winning elections means hiding the reason we lose elections. Seems like an obvious contradiction. To actually be interested in winning is to have a serious and meaningful and honest conversation about why you have failed to do that and failed to deliver on that. And the idea that you can just hide this among the elite of the party tells you what their plan is. Their plan is to pander their way out of the mess that they're in. I think they know that there's a crisis right now within the Democratic Party base about Israel. They can see the public opinion polling. And frankly, again, just not just on the Democratic side, but across the entire spectrum of American public opinion. Just there is the view of Israel has been unfavorable views of Israel have skyrocketed.
Just take a look at these overall numbers right now. The net favorability of Israel among all adults. In 2022, it was plus 13 points. And now the net favorability of Israel amongst all adults, minus 23 points. That's a 36-point change in just 4 years' time amongst all adults.
Rather than deal with this honestly and directly, it seems like they want to be evasive in favor of keeping everybody on board. Figure out a way where they can still maintain the support of major pro-Israel lobby groups like AIPAC. And that is just trying to square a circle, and it's not going to work.
Well, we are starting to see some movement within the party. Some might argue we are hearing more elected officials openly calling for conditioning aid, for ceasefires, even sanctions. 2 bills are moving through Congress, the Block the Bombs Act and the Ceasefire Compliance Act. Can you walk us through the importance of legislation like that? Does it matter? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think legislation, for folks who don't know, the Block the Bombs Act is essentially an attempt to stop the most horrific weapons from being given to Israel. They're called so-called offensive weapons. They're the 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs that genuinely don't have use in an urban area. And Israel has been just dropping them in the middle of densely populated areas, collapsing high-rise buildings, leading to mass civilian casualties. And so we have seen, in my view, an unprecedented level of support for legislation like this. It was simply unheard of a couple of years ago that you would have dozens and dozens of, members of the US Congress signing their names to a bill like this. And yet that is the direction that we are moving. And it is the same with the Ceasefire Compliance Act, where basically that's another bill that suggests that if Israel does not comply with the ceasefire agreement, either by killing Palestinians or by restricting aid from going into Gaza, then you would reassess the U.S. relationship with Israel and you would sanction Israel and block continued military funding. Now, that also presents a different kind of problem, which is that who's to assess whether Israel's complying or not? We all know that Israel is not complying with the ceasefire. It never has. And frankly, I would go as far as to say that there is no ceasefire in Gaza. That word itself is a lie. So these are imperfect bills, and yet the fact that they have as much support as they do is a difference. And Malika, I think there's an even more significant one, a motion that happened in the Senate with the pressure of Bernie Sanders.
Yes, just last month.
Yes, an effort to block military bulldozers from being given to Israel and another effort to block bombs. And the fact that for one of these bills, you had 40 Democratic senators vote in favor of that block, that is just simply unheard of. That is a political earthquake, at least from the perspective of Israel and the Israel lobby, who've always counted on bipartisan American support for Israel. To see that an overwhelming majority of Democrats in the Senate are willing to say enough is enough, that I think is extremely significant, and it's a sign of where things are going. And Alika, I'll just add one more thing on that point.
Yeah.
Is I also think that is not unrelated to the rate at which Israel is going on a rampage throughout the entire region. They see the clock ticking. They know that American public opinion is shifting, and that is why they are going absolutely berserk, trying to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible, advancing in Lebanon in a way that is unhinged, and forcing the US into this war with Iran. They're trying to cause as much damage as possible for as long as they know that they have unconditional American support, because they worry that it's going to dry up at some point.
Well, Omar, for you to see a vote like what you just mentioned, the Bernie Sanders effort in the Senate to block certain arms sales to Israel, to see that number of people voting for it, but then for it ultimately to fail, that feels like a waterfall of emotions there. What actually happens when you see news like that?
Malika, this is the closest we've ever come. So it was absolutely a very, very significant moment for me to see that, and a deeply moving one about the fact that the work that we've put in for many, many, many years, trying to advance a more conscientious and just foreign policy, might be paying off. I remember at the beginning of this genocide in Gaza a couple of years ago, where I felt like this could not go on. Surely somebody was going to step in. Surely this is a line too far. And as the days and weeks and months and years passed on without that line being drawn anywhere, I, to some extent lost hope. It's hard to say it, not to the point to where I'm willing to stop doing what I'm doing. I still think this advocacy is absolutely necessary, but genuinely doubting deep within myself whether we're making any progress or whether this is going to get somewhere. Yeah. And I think moments like this are the reassurance that even though I did not expect it to pass, I certainly did not expect it to get that much support. And it just gives me just enough hope to finally be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
I'll be back with Omar after the break. Omar, as we discussed, polls are shifting. Younger voters are speaking out more forcefully. And when it comes to policy, many feel that Washington is still out of touch. And that could be why they are heading in the direction of less traditional political voices. Let's talk about Hassan Piker.
Hey, you know what the Democrats are supposed to do? Drop a voice that is very clearly identifying the popular movement in the heart of the party for what, really? For defending Israel. Yeah, I don't think they should do that.
He is a Twitch streamer who has become a massive force on the left. And he's become a real nuisance for establishment Democrats. The number of times he has come up in these political conversations about 2028 and what the Dems are or are not doing right is kind of remarkable. Why is he making them so nervous?
It's funny, Malika, because the people who complain the most about Hassan Piker's prominence are the ones who are tweeting the most about him. It's also incredibly self-defeating to say he's irrelevant. Why are we talking about him? But then that's what they keep tweeting about. It's funny because I just want to acknowledge that Hassan Piker, who in my view is obviously a conscientious voice, obviously comes at this from a very, very good place, is ultimately a streamer, which means that what he does for a living effectively is just speak for hours and hours and hours on end. And if what you do for a living is just speak endlessly, you're inevitably going to say a few dumb things here and there. And for someone to come along and to clip those up and put them together and say, this is who that person is, from my perspective, is obviously dishonest. And again, I think his appeal is obvious. When I think of Kamala Harris losing the election, I tend to put it on two things. One, obviously the one we've talked about in this episode, Gaza. But also the other is that feeling of inauthenticity. When she speaks, it sounds like consultants have put together words that mean nothing but sound good. That's what it sounds like. And Donald Trump, despite being shamelessly dishonest, can't speak 3 sentences without lying 7 times during it, comes across as authentic. He's not afraid to sound like himself and just speaks plainly. And that's a little bit of what's happening with Hassan Piker as well, is that he doesn't speak in a polished way but it sounds real. It sounds like you're talking to a real human being. And the Democratic Party establishment is uncomfortable with that. I mean, they keep talking about how the left needs its own Joe Rogan. Part of that is letting go of this obsession of sounding palatable to absolutely everyone and trying to be real for a difference. And that's what he brings to the table, and that's what they see as a threat. And again, it just, not to sound like a broken record, but it just reeks of people who don't learn the lessons of the past. You've lost to Donald Trump twice for a reason. Pay attention, understand what you're doing wrong, and they just don't want to get it. I think they're just addicted to the old, framework. But at least it's a battle within the Democratic Party establishment. It's not what it used to be anymore. It's not a consensus. There's a break happening. I mean, even someone like Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff, known as very pro-Israel, coming out just a couple of days ago saying that he's for ending U.S. military funding for Israel. It's just unprecedented. Again, there's a real fight and a real shift
unprecedented
happening.
on so many levels. And yet, is it the kind of thing that should make people who want that excited? How did it make you feel?
Yeah, I'm not under the illusion that these people are genuinely, sincerely concerned about human rights, and that's where they're coming from. I get that it's political pandering. The way I think of politics in general, I don't need a politician to genuinely, sincerely agree with me. I think of politicians as people who are there to serve themselves. They want to put themselves in positions of power because they get some kind of personal benefit or gratification from it. And our job is to simply outline the parameters of what's acceptable and unacceptable for politicians, and supporting genocide is unacceptable. And as long as they understand that, even for purely self-interested reasons, that's a plus. That is a positive. Now, the challenge here is, are they willing to only say the right thing for the sake of getting elected? Or are they actually understanding that they have to do the right thing to earn the trust of the people long term? That is a fight that has not been settled yet. And I think that we have a role in shaping that, is that we have to keep up the pressure and to essentially create consequences that any backtracking of good statements, of good policy positions is going to be met with outrage from the public and possibly loss of support. I think that's how we move the ball.
Okay, well, in talking about moving the ball, I'm going to shift away from looking at Israel and talk about another political earthquake, because if we are looking at this as a reckoning or a lack thereof, there's something else that the Democratic Party is going to have to contend with. And that is thanks to a new Supreme Court ruling in which now congressional districts are being withdrawn. This can get pretty inside baseball for people outside of the United States, but it is incredibly important. And so I'm hoping you can walk us through what that means. A state you called home for many years is one of the places that's happening, Tennessee, where crowds of residents upset about these maps being shifted began shouting down the vote at the Tennessee Capitol this week. So what's happening here?
Yeah, it's an absolutely horrifying story, I think. Even if you don't have to care about Palestine or Israel or anywhere else. If all you're concerned about is American democracy and what's left of it, this is a deeply, deeply alarming development where you're essentially having politicians redraw the lines of congressional maps so that they can hold on to power, even though they don't really have the support of the populations that they rule over. This is, rather than voters electing their politicians, this is politicians getting to choose their voters. And it's not the way the system is supposed to work. And it all stems, again, there's always been gerrymandering. That's what the process of redrawing these maps to accommodate certain political considerations is known as gerrymandering. And it's been around for a very long time, but it has not been this heavy-handed until Donald Trump himself, looking at the polling, realizing that Republicans are in real trouble, decided to effectively tell governors and Republicans across the country that it's time to redraw the maps to make sure that Republicans can hold on to a majority. And now Democrats are retaliating in kind, including the state that I'm currently living in, Virginia, where there's an effort to temporarily redraw the lines to make up for the fact that Republicans are stealing districts. It's a very, very horrible situation. And I don't want to disconnect it entirely from Donald Trump's foreign policy. That is one of the reasons why Republicans are losing control. It has to do primarily with this Iran war on top of support for Israel's genocide and war crimes. And people don't want it. They're fed up with it. I don't want to pretend that American democracy was ever perfect. It's always been flawed. But to break it to this point, I don't know if you can even call it a democracy anymore by the time Trump is done with it. It's a very, very deeply serious and stressful situation.
Finally, then, Omar, taking the weight of what you just said, let's fast forward to 6 months from now, the midterm elections in November. You earlier hinted at the idea that you don't always vote Democrat, but the Republican Party does not have anything to offer you right now. So if we bring this back to the lesser of two evils, come November, can Democrats win people back, people like you, people that voted uncommitted?
Yeah. You know, my vote for the Democrats has always been a lesser of two evils vote. It's always given the choices, this is what you have to do. And in that sense, I think they can win back progressive voters and voters of color and many other people by being meaningfully better than Republicans. But just, I continue to worry that even though they see that right now, they are content to remain the rotten party that has lost the past several elections because of the way that they behaved, and simply counting on Donald Trump and the Republicans imploding and using the momentum off of that to just re-win elections without any meaningful change. I think they're probably going to succeed. If you ask me what the November would look like, I think there's going to be a Democratic Party sweep, assuming that Trump allows a fair and meaningful election to actually take place. Nonetheless, I don't think that they've earned what they've done so far, earned the meaningful trust of voters who are progressive. I'm glad that we've reached the point where rhetoric is improving, but it really is going to take meaningful action for that trust to be rebuilt with people. That is going to take a lot more work than they've done so far. And again, on the one hand, looking at the characters currently leading the party, I'm not particularly optimistic, but I also believe that it is up for the rank and file in the party to say that we need a meaningful course correction. And that means that a Democratic Party that no longer just panders to special interests, doesn't just pander to AIPAC, doesn't pander to AIPAC at all, frankly. And most critically, Malika, is that the change here is that there used to be a time where the Democratic Party establishment felt they needed AIPAC and the special interests and so on so they can win elections, because to criticize Israel is a death wish in your political career. It's just, there's no way out. We're not that country anymore. That's what they need to understand, is that you can be critical of Israel. And I'm very hopeful that we are going to see more and more voices win elections who insist on Palestinian humanity being recognized and fundamentally changing the broken relationship that we have with Israel and its racist, monstrous government.
Omar Baddar, thank you for your analysis on this.
Thank you so much for having me.